LangGraph's stateful workflow orchestration employs a directed graph model to coordinate conditional execution paths between specialized processing nodes. This artifact demonstrates the final compilation phase where discrete components, query generation, retrieval, relevance grading, and response synthesis, are assembled into a coherent decision pipeline. We're about to examine how the graph topology is declared through node registration and edge routing, with conditional transitions governed by runtime state evaluation. The compilation step will materialize this declarative specification into an executable workflow ready for question-answering operations.
From LangGraph, graph import StateGraph start end. From LangGraph, prebuilt import ToolNode tools condition. Workflow equals StateGraph messages state. Hash define the nodes we will cycle between. Workflow, add node generate query or respond. Workflow, add node retrieve, tool node retriever tool. Workflow, add node rewrite question. Workflow, add node generate answer. Workflow at edge start, generate query or respond. Hash decide whether to retrieve. Workflow add conditional edges. Generate query or respond. Hash assess LLM decision call, retriever tool, or respond to the user. Tools condition. Hash translate the condition, outputs to nodes in our graph. Tools, retrieve. End. Hash edges taken after the action node is called. Workflow add conditional edges. Retrieve. Hash assess agent decision. Grade documents. Workflow, add edge generate answer, end. Workflow, add edge rewrite question. Generate query or respond. Hash compile. Graph equals workflow compile.
This code demonstrates the compilation of a retrieval agent workflow using LangGraph's StateGraph. The pattern creates a directed graph where nodes represent processing steps and edges define control flow between them. The workflow begins with generate query or respond, which uses an LLM to decide whether to retrieve documents or respond directly. This decision is implemented via tools condition, a prebuilt conditional edge that checks for tool calls in the LLM's output. The graph includes two key conditional branches. First, tools condition routes to either the retrieval path or directly to end. Second, after retrieval, grade documents evaluates document relevance, directing flow to either answer generation or question rewriting. This creates a feedback loop where irrelevant retrievals trigger question refinement. The ToolNode wrapper handles tool execution, while standard nodes implement custom logic. The compile method finalizes the graph, creating an executable workflow that can be visualized and streamed. This approach provides fine-grained control over retrieval decisions while maintaining clean separation between decision logic and processing steps. The conditional edges enable dynamic routing based on intermediate results, while the state management handles message passing between nodes. The pattern balances flexibility with structure, allowing custom nodes to be combined with prebuilt components like ToolNode and tools condition. Let's break it down.
From LangGraph, graph import StateGraph start end.
Imports StateGraph, start, and end from the LangGraph graph module. StateGraph is a class for building stateful workflow graphs, while start and end are constants representing the entry and exit points of the graph.
From LangGraph, prebuilt import ToolNode tools condition.
Imports ToolNode and tools condition from the LangGraph prebuilt module, providing components for tool integration and conditional tool execution in the graph.
Workflow equals StateGraph messages state.
Creates a workflow instance using the StateGraph class, initializing it with messages state as its state management type. This establishes the foundational structure for a stateful workflow where messages state will track the conversation or processing state throughout execution.
Workflow. Add node generate query or respond.
Adds the function generate query or respond as a node in the workflow graph. This registers the function as a processing step that can be invoked during workflow execution.
Workflow. Add node retrieve. ToolNode retriever tool.
Adds a node named Retrieve to the workflow graph, wrapping the retriever tool in a ToolNode container. The ToolNode handles the execution interface for the retriever tool within the workflow's node system.
Workflow. Add node rewrite question.
Adds the rewrite question function as a node in the workflow graph. This registers the function as a processing step that can be connected to other nodes in the workflow.
Workflow. Add node generate answer.
Adds the generate answer function as a node in the workflow graph. This registers the function as a processing step that can be connected to other nodes in the workflow, enabling it to receive inputs and produce outputs as part of the graph's execution flow.
Workflow at edge start. Generate query or respond.
Adds a directed edge in the workflow graph from the start node to the generate query or respond node, establishing that the workflow begins by executing the generate query or respond step.
Workflow add conditional edges.
Adds conditional edges to the workflow graph, allowing dynamic routing between nodes based on specified conditions. This method call begins the process of defining branching logic, where the workflow can take different paths depending on runtime conditions or data values.
Generate query or respond.
References a function or method named generate query or respond that will either generate a query or produce a response, likely based on context or parameters not visible in this segment. The exact behavior depends on how this function is implemented and called elsewhere in the code.
Tools condition.
References a variable named tools condition in the current scope. The line itself doesn't perform any operation. It's likely part of a larger expression or statement where this variable is being used or passed as an argument. Without additional context, the observable behavior is simply accessing the value stored in tools condition.
Tools retrieve.
Specifies that the retrieve tool is available for use in this context. This is likely part of a configuration object where tools is a key that lists enabled tools, and retrieve is the identifier for a specific tool or functionality that can be invoked.
Workflow, add edge generate answer, end.
Adds a directed edge from the generate answer node to the end node in the workflow graph, establishing that after the answer generation step completes, the workflow should terminate.
Workflow, add edge rewrite question. Generate query or respond.
Adds a directed edge in the workflow graph from the rewrite question node to the generate query or respond node, establishing that the rewrite question step must complete before generate query or respond can execute.
Graph equals workflow compile.
Compiles the workflow object into an executable graph structure. The compile method processes the workflow definition and returns a ready-to-run graph instance that can be executed or inspected. This is the final step before the workflow can be invoked or deployed. This workflow demonstrates LangGraph's stateful orchestration pattern, where discrete processing steps are connected through conditional routing. The graph starts with generate query or respond, which uses tools condition to dynamically route to either retrieval or direct response based on LLM output. The retrieval path employs a ToolNode wrapper for the retriever tool, while grade documents evaluates relevance to determine whether to generate an answer or rewrite the question, creating a feedback loop for refinement. Standard nodes handle custom logic like answer generation, while pre-built components manage tool integration and conditional flows. The compile step finalizes this declarative specification into an executable workflow, balancing flexibility with structured control flow. The key insight is how conditional edges enable dynamic decision-making while maintaining clean separation between processing steps and routing logic.
The retrieve node hunts ghosts in the library, while generate answer weaves tapestries from their whispers.